I went to Brownsburg High School and Brownsburg Junior High and any elementary school in Brownsburg. There was no such thing as diversity.
Yeah,
I mean,
non-existent.
A lot of white kids.
Yeah.
A lot of middle class. I mean, even the class was the middle, upper class growing up. So people didn't, it was impossible conversations to have about like things you need to talk about when you're growing up, like diversity, socioeconomic things. They just didn't exist there.
There was no need for that to even come up because you weren't interacting with those situations. Living in the suburbs for my family, I guess for the most part, was that my parents didn't have to worry about the dangers of the city. So, you know, I lived near a public park, and my parents didn't mind me being gone all day riding bikes and being in the park and not knowing, because they knew it was a safe area for me to grow up and have fun outside all day. My dad always gives me a hard time. Whenever I say I'm going to Broad Ripple to see some friends, he's like, you need to go in groups because there are so many break-ins, there are so many robberies and rapes, and it's like, we're talking 20 minutes away.
I think interestingly, even though I've lived in Indianapolis and DC, the only crime that's ever been committed against me was when I lived in the suburbs. My car got broken into, like, in front of my parents' house, which I think is kind of humorous that they're worried about crime, and the only time anything's ever happened to me was there. My best friend in high school, she gets, like, really emotional in class one day, and she says, you all can't understand what it's like to be different until you are different. And we're all sitting there. White, middle-class kids. The only difference she could have is she outed herself in class, basically, because everyone knew there was one. I mean, there aren't any differences you can really have in a setting like that. Brownsburg's a pretty well-to-do community, was for a long time, and when they started bringing in cheaper housing, diversity came in, and people thought that was a bad thing. I still don't understand how that is a bad thing. Like, having diversity teaches your kids to live in the real world. You can't expect them to live in the bubble that is their suburban town the rest of their lives. Brownsburg, at the time that I was there was one black student in the entire high school. And he was great, but one student isn't diverse by any means. And his family situation was interesting. I believe he was adopted.
Yeah.
And
I think
the whole family was adopted. And so it was 2 adults, and then they had adopted, I don't know, 8 kids, some high amount of kids. And school newspaper ran an article about their family. I'll never forget this. I was in the cafeteria when it happened, and the article was heart-wrenching in my opinion. The article talked about how the mom would lay awake at night, afraid when people drove by, because she would think that it was someone coming to harass them or like shoot them. I mean, there was some reference to guns and just this fear that they constantly lived in because it's such a place where diversity is not accepted. And a kid was reading the article in the school lunchroom, I believe, and said, well, why don't they just leave then? Instead of like, why? How can we make them feel better? How can we draw more people in that are like them? It was, why don't they leave?
It shouldn't be like that. Everyone should be equal, and there shouldn't be a problem with it. But because of the stereotype of our community back in the day, I mean, our hometown was one of the original KKK towns in Indiana. My cousin in junior high was the first to date one of those African-American boys from that family. And not only did her parents completely shun the idea, but all of her friends stopped hanging out with her for it. And she ended up dating him for, 4 years. That was her first love. And, I didn't have a problem with it just because of sheer fact that I got to know him as a person and everything, but it always hurt to see that people would look at her and say, she used to be such a good kid, and now she's dating a black guy. I think the parents' perspective, especially them living in the suburb for so long, is they get that stereotype that if you move closer to the city, you're going to be in more danger.
Yeah.
And we look at it as young adults thinking, this is a new horizon for us to break free and decide for ourselves of what we want to accept and what we don't want to accept. But the fact that we do that and it's something that our parents disagree about, I think that shows how much we've grown as a person. I wouldn't say it was overwhelming, but it definitely did hit the thought process that there's more out there.